Today I'm going to share some layering and blending tips for colored pencil. My first tip for you today is to make sure that your pencils are very sharp. You want to work the pencil in a light hand in small little circles or ovals on the paper. This is going to ensure that that pigment gets into all those little nooks and crannies of the paper so that you end up with a much smoother result than if you worked with a dull pencil and just kind of scribbled it all over the place. Now I'm working on hot press watercolor paper. This is a really nice texture for colored pencil. It blends out beautifully and allows you to get a lot of detail. If you choose a paper that has too much tooth or texture to it, it's going to be very hard to get smooth blending. My next tip is to overlap your colors. You can see here where the purple and magenta are overlapping each other just a bit along the edges. That way when I blend, I get a nice smooth transition from one color to another. I blend two ways, one with odorless mineral spirits, which you will see in just a moment, and the other is by burnishing or pushing harder with the pencil to really jam the color into the paper. I don't want to burnish too early on though, because if I do, I'm damaging the tooth of the paper and it prevents me from adding very many additional layers on top of that. So if I'm going to add pressure with the pencil, I'm going to hold off on that until my final layers. My first layers I prefer to blend out with odorless mineral spirits because it's not going to damage the tooth of that paper. There you can see I am working with the odorless mineral spirit, and that is with a Taklon bristled paintbrush. If you're wondering why I don't just blend with water, it's because water is not compatible with these pencils. These aren't watercolor pencils. So I'm using the odorless mineral spirits, and you can see it makes the color really bold. It pushes that pigment into the paper. And once that dries, I'm going to add additional layers on top. And I can keep working back and forth like this until I get my color saturation and my values as dark as I want them to be. If you are using this method and you're getting very grainy, gritty results, that just means you need more pigment. Add more pencil to the paper before you blend out with the odorless mineral spirits. Keep layering like that until it looks how you want it to. Now, the odorless mineral spirits doesn't spread the pigment around quite like a watercolor pencil would with water, where the color really spreads across the paper if you want it to. That's not going to happen, but you can still smudge one color into another. So when you get into smaller detail, switch over to a smaller paintbrush and be more controlled as you apply that odorless mineral spirit. For my first few layers here, you can see this has a very almost crayon type look, a very rough, grainy, gritty look. He doesn't have the smoothness or the detail that I want in the end piece. That is okay for your early layers. You're just going to keep blending and layering on top. As long as you haven't pushed very hard and damaged the tooth of the paper, you're going to be able to continuously layer. Now, when I get to the final details, I do start pushing a lot harder with the pencil. The edges of the fins, even when I start adding more white for highlights, I am adding a lot more pressure. This is where I start to burnish that pencil. So you can see it's not always a bad thing to add a lot of pressure to the pencil. You just want to be controlled on when you do that, knowing I'm not going to add additional layers once I've pushed really hard with the pencil. There I am using the Faber-Castell Perfection Eraser to remove some of the pigment from the paper. And this is going to make it so that when I put the white pencil on top, it's really bold. It really stands out. If I were to put that white pencil just over the pigment that was already there, a lot of the magentas and the blacks, it's going to lighten the area, but it's not going to be that bright. And you can see the eraser does not bring the paper back to white, but it does remove enough that when I go on top with the white pencil, it really stands out. As I'm adding the detail around the fish, again with that white pencil, I am pushing quite a bit harder so it really shows up better. And you can use the white pencil because it is a fairly translucent white. You can use that one to blend your colors pretty well. They will lighten the colors a little bit, but it works beautifully for blending, especially on those final layers. So I'm using that eraser again to pull out more areas that I want the white to really stand out on. That eraser is nice. It's got a brush on the back end of it so I can wipe away the eraser marks without having to use my hand, smearing that across the paper. Whenever you're working in colored pencils, if you are struggling to get your color saturation where you want it to be, your darks darker, your lights lighter, usually that's just an issue of needing more layers. Keep working in a light hand and add additional layers until you get that to look how you want it to. The pencils themselves are wonderful, especially these ones for layering because they don't have a waxy buildup, so you can get a lot of layers with these. Now those white bubbles around the outside edge, the white pencil is able to stick to that pretty well because that area was not burnished. I did not push very hard or flatten the tooth of the paper, which allowed the white pencil to really stick to those areas, even though they were so much darker than the white of the pencil. Cleaning up my edges, just those final details on this guy. These pencils are wonderful for fine detail because they do sharpen to such a fine point.